Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Screenwriting Tips. My name is Tony D, and today we're talking about the animated movie, how to write animation. It's not a whole lot different than writing a regular screenplay. The major difference is, much like a comic book, you're probably going to need to describe the designs of the characters a lot more fully, since those character designs are probably going to be more integral than, say, describing the actors. You know, you're kind of, when you cast a movie, you're kind of at the mercy of who's available, who can act, and, you know, you put in, when you describe a character that's going to be in a live action movie, what do you put in? You put in something like 30-something, detective, rugged looking, you know, so you put in enough specifics so they'll get a guy who looks the part, but you can't get too specific, otherwise the pool of actors shrinks down. So even if you put in a guy who's in his 30s, who they're gonna cast is a guy who could pass for in his 30s, because there's plenty of actors who they pass for older, they pass for younger. You know, that's part of being an actor, is to have a very malleable look, and depending on the production, of course. Now, obviously, if it's a low budget production, you may not have that flexibility. You may not be able to put somebody in a fat suit or whatever. With animation, the advantage, of course, is you can have literally any actor do the voice of literally any character. I mean, we had Alec Baldwin voice the baby in Boss Baby, right? So, like, you saw that movie, like anyone did, right, Dougie? Yeah, I'm just kidding. Come here, Dougie. Dougie doesn't want to come up. Anyhow, so that first description of the characters can be much more specific in an animated movie. If you can get some mock-ups done from an artist and put them in the screenplay, you know, that can be a help. You don't want to go too nuts with that. I mean, obviously, you know, selling animation, that's tough. It's a lot easier than it was, because the systems for making animated movies are now a lot more streamlined thanks to computers. So what they do now is, you know, they don't draw every frame like they used to. They draw certain frames, and then the computer will fill in the rest. And, you know, it's all digital now. It's all digital, and it's the only way it could really work. So these movies are still, despite the fact you have the computer, they're incredibly expensive to make and time consuming. Even the guys who are online at YouTube doing short little animations for various things, you know, those guys, it takes a lot. It takes a lot to animate. It takes a team, ideally. So, you know, you got to keep that in mind if you're going to decide to write an animated movie on spec. It was always described to me, especially when you talk about animated television series, that animated series are a lost leader. They don't make their money until initially it was the 10th showing, but now it's probably lower than that. You probably guess maybe like around the 5th. Depends on how it's animated. I mean, if you look at an online, not online, but the Adult Swim cartoons. The Adult Swim cartoons, a lot of them are really low key. If you look at Aqua Teen Hunger Force, it's about as low key and cheap as you can get for an animated series. There's been a few others, mostly on Adult Swim. Doggy, come here, Doggy. Doggy, I'm trying to talk about animated cartoons. Hold on one second. Doggy, come and be in the video. Come here. Don't run away. If you're gonna run away, stay out of the room. You're not gonna be in the video. Sorry about that. Doggy doesn't want to be in the video today. Sorry, fans of my dog, Joan. Again, the design is very important. It's often important to the actual story because, you know, animation is very iconic, you know, and the design can be very important. So, you know, it also depends upon the kind of animated movie you want. The advantages, of course, is you can really control that look. You know, if you work with an art team and an animation team, you know, you really control the look of the movie. And the other advantage, of course, is you can go anywhere. The budget is the budget. Like, you know, an animated movie is going to get more expensive because it's in space or because it's in the jungle or whatever. Animated movies are expensive to begin with, but they're all pretty much at the same level of expense. I mean, really, what are the variables? Well, I guess some of the variables might be the music or the talent, but the actual production itself is, you know, it's kind of static, depending. Now, if you look at the credits of a major animated movie, you see how insane it is, how many people work on these things. I mean, it's nuts. You look at a Pixar movie, just watch the credits. It's crazy amount of animators, designers, you know, at that level. They got guys who are just working on, you know, how the hair looks when the wind blows. I mean, it's almost like a team that works on a video game. You know, they got one person just to work on the jiggling of the boobs of the female characters. I mean, it's nuts. You know, if you're going to have something, you're obviously not going to work on anything that big. So this is a big reason not to write an animated movie because one, on spec, you're talking millions and millions of dollars. There's no cheap, really way to do it. If you're doing an animated thing on YouTube, maybe, you know, you've cut every corner. You could do some 10-minute thing that's cool, but it's not going to look like Pixar stuff. You know, it's gonna be 2D. You know, there's a lot of 2D stuff. It's great. You know, Archer is like that. What's the name? The Venture Brothers. You know, that stuff now, which was state of the art years ago, is now cheaper to make, and it's still pretty cool. I mean, you can get some really great designs going in a 2D animated, you know, movie or show like that. But again, there are limitations, and you know, the main limitation is money, as always. Somewhat the talent. The amazing thing about the voice actors now is really if you can get the talent, you can have them do the whole damn movie, and then they're done. You know, you have them do all the voices all in one go. You get that all on, you know, a high quality digital recorder. You know, you need a good sound guy, but the talent is basically done, and they can work in a, you know, a studio environment that's comfortable. It only takes a few days. You know, a lot of times they do these things, especially the cartoons. You know, they do it all at once because that's going to save them a ton of money. You know, if they can script out an entire season or an entire movie, you know, you can knock that out, you know, 3 or 4 days if you're really on it. I mean, you know, provided there's some rehearsals and other direction, good talent. So that's a huge advantage. You know, you're not constantly dealing with talent, and then you're animating according to their verbal delivery, right? So sometimes an actor will say something in a way that indicates movement or expression, and you can have that drawn in. That's why the voice actors go first, and then the animation goes around that. So huge advantage there. But again, doing this stuff, it takes a long time. You're going to need a team. If you don't have a team, it's going to take forever. So, there are ways to cut corners. You can cut back on dialogue. But then you're more dependent upon the visuals. And if the visuals aren't great, if you're working on a very low-key kind of thing, that's not going to work. You have to decide whether your animated piece is more dialogue driven. If you look at something like Archer or the Venture Brothers, they have great designs, but the shows are very dialogue driven as well. There's a lot of great jokes in there and visuals. That's why they're both such great shows if you haven't seen them. So my recommendation, do not write an animated movie on spec, unless you're an animator yourself. If you're an animator yourself or an aspiring one, well, that's a different story. You should write the screenplay first. And you should explore the skills of screenwriting. You should know the 3-act structure because you should write it as a movie. There's not a tremendous difference in terms of the writing. With an animated movie. The only difference is, with the animated movie, you have unlimited budget to go anywhere. You also have more flexibility in terms of the characters. So a lot of times, you shoot a movie and you become friends with the actors. They don't want to cut an actor loose, unless they kind of have to. If you don't like an actor and maybe he's only got one or two lines, but they really like him, his performance is so great, sometimes they write extra scenes for him just to throw him in there. Not true with an animated movie. With an animated movie, you have more control. You won't have to worry about a director doing something like that. You won't have to worry about a director going super far off script because he can't. The only time he can go off script is if the talent is improvising something, over the audio. But they're less likely to do that as actors because they're not in a set, and they tend to feel like, well, I got to read this script. I mean, that's all they have to go by, and also their voice needs to be perfect, as perfect deliveries. So, you can't, it's not like the visuals are going to cover things, if you know what I mean, or, if you do some great motion, some great visual as an actor, that's not going to work unless it's drawn, right? So I think it's less chance of directors and actors going off the reservation of your screenplay, which, is kind of good for you, but it can make things a little less spontaneous in terms of the deliveries and whatnot, so that's something to keep in mind. You don't want to put tremendous amount of ad-libbing in an animated movie, I don't think. There's also time limits. An animated TV show, it's going to have a tight time frame, very specific. For a movie, you have a little more flexibility. It's the same as a live action movie. It's going to be 90 to 125 pages. But again, as always, you want to come down closer to 90, 100 pages. Probably, since these are more tight, you could really come in right at 90, 91 pages. Perfect. It's not going to be a situation where, again, there's going to be a tremendous amount of variables in terms of the time. So, but animating a 90-minute movie, very expensive, which is another reason why to keep it at 90, because go up to 100 pages, you're just adding more expense, and you're really not getting more money. people don't pay to go to a movie by the minute. They just pay whether or not it's good. So if you can keep it nice and tight, I would say if you're going to do an animated screenplay, try to keep it pretty close to 90 pages. And if you're an animator, you want to create the least amount of headache for yourself. So you want something tight. But I always suggest, and I would suggest this for comic book artists, animators, people who aren't writers, think about hiring a writer. Look at guys who have written stuff. In my world, it's a shame because the people who tend to hire writers or want to hire writers tend to be kind of desperate clients who have kind of reached their wits' end. They tend not to be the guys with tremendous amounts of money because those guys, unfortunately, either they hire big name guys, and it's kind of just like anything else, like, the big name guys are constantly getting the work, but it's also too that they tend to have bigger egos because they have big money, and they think, well, I could write most of it and then I'll just hire a guy to clean it up. No, that usually doesn't work if you're not really a writer. I mean, if you want something of quality, look, and I understand the impulse, because I said that about actors for years. I looked at actors and acting and I thought, how hard is that? It's not that hard. What is acting? Give me a script, I can act. But really, after I spent doing improv for 15 years, I come to understand, that actors who really work on their craft, they really do have skills that, until you drill down a little bit, you kind of can't see them. It's almost effortless. It's like people who do their job so well that you don't see how well they're doing. When you make it look effortless, unfortunately, the downside of that is clients sometimes don't see the effort. You make it look too easy, they go, wow, that was easy. I probably could have done that myself. Once you give somebody the solution to a problem, it may look so obvious to them, they thought, oh, I would have figured that out eventually. Not true. So if you are an animator and you're not a writer and you're not going to spend the time, take your ideas and start looking for a writer. The best thing to do is seek out material that is similar to what you want to do, right? Now, a lot of times that means, oh, well, if I'm doing a cartoon, then I got to look for guys who've written cartoon. Not necessarily. You want to look for things in the same sort of wheelhouse, Yes, obviously a guy who's written animation before probably is going to be a better pick if he's the right fit. But if you're doing a science fiction movie, let's say, and you have access to a guy who's written sci-fi novels, those kind of guys could be very good. It depends on the individual. It's tough to find the right guy who's going to be a fit, but understand that writers, really have something to bring to the table. So consider hiring a writer. If you're, I understand as an animator, you have ideas too, but ideas aren't the writing. They're not the writing. Everybody has great ideas. Talk to somebody long enough, they'll spit out a couple of good ideas. But it's the skills that make those ideas work. So I'll give you an example. I just wrote stand-up comedy for a guy. He's not a stand-up comedian, but he is a funny guy. He's a businessman, and he had to do this event, and he wanted to tell these stories, which he's told like a million times, but he felt like he needed to clean them up and tell them more like a stand-up comic. So my job was to sort of take his stories and flesh them out and sort of organize them like a stand-up comic would do, and give him some of the tools of a stand-up comic. So for instance, he pitched me a couple one-liners, and they were actually pretty funny, a few of them, and I said, what you kind of want to do is you want to have the story memorized that you're going to tell, but then have the one-liners memorized too, so then if things go wrong, you can maybe sidestep into a one-liner, bring the audience back, and then go back into your story. Or you want to open with one and you want to close with one, because his story kind of had a natural ending, but it wasn't like a big killer laugh ending. So I suggested that maybe he could craft it in such a way that he could end with a few one-liners, and then just, if things are going badly in stand-up, you kind of just want to end on a laugh. So if you have a few one-liners in your pocket, and things didn't go so well, and you're at the end of your 5 minutes, just start throwing them out. You get a laugh and go, "Wow, you've been great. Thank you. Good night." So that's one of the skills, right? So writers do the same thing. They're gonna give you the skill set, or bring their skill set, so you don't just animate something that kind of just ends. I'll give you an example. I talked about the movie Polar, which was a pretty interesting film. But Polar has, as I explained in my take, Polar has a real weird vibe to it, in that all the payoffs are in the third act, and the wind up to it is kind of hard to get through. The first 2 acts needed some tweaking. They really needed some work. The third act is just killer and redeems the whole movie. But to get there, on Netflix, it's tough. And they almost ruin it with the opening scene. So a true screenwriter could have come in and said, "Listen, you gotta tweak this a little bit, and you gotta do the things. There's certain rules to a movie as it's laid out for an audience that you want to follow, that can help you. And if you ignore those rules, yeah, you're being all fancy and arty, but you're also taking a huge risk. And most people who take that risk fail. They do. And the reason why is they ignore very basic things, like making your protagonist likable. I mean, that's a basic rule of screenwriting. If you don't make your protagonist likable, people start tuning out. And it's like you built a race car without a steering wheel. I'm going to win the race without a steering wheel. I'm going to be the first driver to do that. You might be, but you're probably not. Because the steering wheel is pretty basic. It's pretty basic to make your protagonist likable. It's pretty basic. It's pretty basic to follow a 3-act structure. Now, you don't have to be beholden to it 100%. There's a little flexibility in that structure, but you need the structure, okay? You need it. You need to use it. If you completely ignore things like the 3-act structure, I'm going to have 6 acts. No. No, you don't want to do that. And also, too, if you don't have the experience, like, I'm an experienced screenwriter. There are other experienced screenwriters. We can play with the format because we've done it so many times. And yes, maybe one of us will be the genius who finally discovers how to cram the 4th act in and make it astounding. I mean, if you look at something like Pulp Fiction, Tarantino uses the 3-act structure in a way that is kind of surprising for the audience, and kind of, I don't know, it just made it different, but it didn't take away from the movie. But Tarantino is very steeped in movies. I mean, he is a screenwriter. I give him much respect. I criticize some of his movies. Inglourious Bastards I felt was but the guy is a screenwriter. He is a great screenwriter. True Romance, fantastic screenplay. Even though he didn't like the final product all that much, I heard he had complaints about it. Man, it's no arguing. It's a fun, great movie. And his screenplays, even the ones I don't like, I can appreciate the art in them. Even The Hateful Eight, which I question some of his choices. he knows how to write a screenplay. He knows what he's doing. You can see it in every line of dialogue. Okay, there are just guys who are like him. You could just see it. And when you're a screenwriter or a writer, you can see that too. If you're an animator who's never written a screenplay before, or you've only written a couple, and you kind of know, but you kind of don't. Look, you as an animator see things that only animators see. You know, I wouldn't call myself an animator. If I saw a piece of animation, I mean, I've watched a lot of cartoons. I could tell you some things I like or don't like about the animation, about the movement or whatever. If you're an animator, you obviously see way more with your eye than I do. It's very true with writers, and you have to give us our due in that. So when we look at dialogue and scenes and how it rolls out, we're seeing things that the average person is not necessarily going to see. So respect that, and if you're an animator, either you got to become a writer or you got to hire a writer. It won't kill you, trust me. Okay, so overall, my recommendation is not to write an animated movie on spec. Maybe a short TV show pitch. That's a little different. I've written a couple of them. But again, the designs of the character are going to be important. Dialogue-driven stuff, probably going to be very important. And a lot of it's going to be dialogue-driven. And the timing's going to be very important. Keep it short, would be my advice. That's it for screenwriting tips. This time, my name is Tony D. You can check out my comics at the Webcomic Factory and Superfrat. You can donate to me on Patreon or on BitChute, which I am also on, along with Daily Motion. Trying to make these things short. I hope I succeeded. I'm going to look at the time. See you next time.